What's going on, everybody? C4 here, and welcome to today's video. First of two. The other video should be dropping later tonight, probably after supper at some point, where I'm going to be going through, finally recapping the draft. It's been a very busy weekend for me outside of the draft. So when I was actually going through this and writing down my notes, I was kind of surprised because I did miss a lot of the day 3 picks, and then I've seen some really good values go to certain teams that also really filled positions and needs. Is gonna compile to a very good grade, which is why we are here today, for me to give you my complete AFC grades. We're not gonna go through each individual pick, but I have weighed every individual pick, but I will talk about certain players that went to certain teams I thought were good, that I thought were bad, that I thought were weird, that I thought were underrated, steals, and everything in between. So starting in the AFC, we will start in the AFC East. And first is the Miami Dolphins, which started in the first round by landing Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle from Clemson. That was an outstanding pick. There were some reports that maybe my Philadelphia Eagles were going to trade up, and the Dolphins might have shafted us, which would be a tad annoying because I would have loved Christian Wilkins in Philadelphia. But when you look at the Miami Dolphins, I mean, you pretty much for every pick can pick a hole. Like, oh, they should have went this, they should have went that. Like, arguably Miami should have went defensive end, then defensive tackle in a perfect world. But bringing in a guy like Christian Wilkins will start day one, and you assume, probably him and Devin Godchaux will be their starting D tackles. I'm also going to throw in this, the Josh Rosen trade. They traded their second round pick and a 2020 fifth round pick to the Arizona Cardinals to get Josh Rosen. In my opinion, Josh Rosen would have been regarded as the top quarterback in this year's draft class, and I kind of have to weigh that for the Miami Dolphins. They finally have a great quarterback. I mean, Josh Rosen, since I'm trying to think, since I've been a fan of football, I would like to think Josh Rosen's the most talented quarterback the Miami Dolphins have had. They've had some, Chad Pennington had a couple flashes here and there. I mean, Tannehill had one okay year. I feel like I'm probably missing someone all in between. I mean, Drew Brees, the trade that never was. So I don't think it's that outrageous to say that Josh Rosen's the most talented quarterback Miami Dolphins have had in 20 years. I also like the selection of Michael Dieter, offensive lineman from Wisconsin. I think that's a big get for an offensive line that needs to get a lot better. I mean, a big reason why Josh Rosen struggled, I think, last year in Arizona was the offensive line was not very good at all. They had like one legit offensive lineman on the Cardinals last year in DJ Humphries. And you look at the Miami Dolphins, their offensive line's not much better. They were a below average offensive line last year, and they lost debatably their best lineman in Jawan James, who I think went to the Broncos, I believe. So, like, you look at the offensive line, you have Laremy Tunsil, but not much else outside of that. I think Michael Dieter will be a guy that'll be able to establish himself as a rookie. So, kind of cheating a little bit, adding in the Josh Rosen trade. I'm giving the Miami Dolphins an A. I think they did a very good draft. And I will say, right now I can look at my notes, see all the ratings. I actually wasn't too overly critical for a lot of these drafts. A lot of these drafts have fairly decent grades. We are starting with an A. So, moving down, we're going to look at the New York Jets, who were just sitting there, and Quinnen Williams fell into their lap. That's an outstanding pick. Great scheme fit for that 3-4. And every time I've talked about Quinnen Williams, I've said, a lot of people thought he was versatile. I think, I would much rather have them as a 3-4 end than a 4-3 defensive tackle. That's a 3 technique. So I think that's a big get for the Jets. And now you have the new Williams Wall. They got Ja'Kai Polite. He absolutely slipped with the whole, didn't have a great offseason. He came in a little bit heavy, looked a little bit sloppy in the drills. Reports said he didn't have a great interview process. But the Jets have spent a lot of money at inside linebacker, Avery Williamson and C.J. Mosley. And this is where in my mock draft I had them going Josh Allen because you have nothing really in terms of edge rushers. So get a guy like Ja'Kai Polite, who has, I still think, obviously a little bit of Florida Gator bias. And I'll say right now, I was never as high as some people. Like there's people that had Ja'Kai Polite as like top 10, top 15 talent in this year's draft class. I thought he's a legit first round talent. But, I've seen him and watched him enough to say that, it's a small scope that we're looking at Ja'Kai Polite. He kind of just had a one big year, but he's relentless, and he's an absolute, I think he's a legitimate first-round talent. What, they got him in the third round? So I think he's going to be able to compete right away to start at outside linebacker. I was a little surprised with the Chuma Edoga pick. I thought that was a little bit of a reach. So if I had to have a negative about the Jets draft, just a little bit of a reach there for a overhyped offensive lineman from one of the most overrated schools in college. And I don't even hate USC. They're just incredible. USC and Texas are like the two most overrated schools. Get over it. The Rose Bowl was good like 10 years ago. They haven't done anything since. And another good pick, I did like Blake Cashman. They got him out of Minnesota. I feel like that could actually be a nice forward-thinking move. He'll be a nice little third linebacker and potentially could help their cap scenario going forward, as I could see him and C.J. Mosley being the long-term pairing there in the inside of that linebacking core, and then they can move on from Avery Williamson. So I'm going to give the Jets an A-. I thought it was a very nice draft. And yeah, I mean, we need the AFC East needs to start drafting better so they can finally start trying somehow, some way to compete with the New England Patriots. Speaking of the Patriots, look at their draft. N'Keal Harry, the last pick in the first round. He was, at points in time, my #1 wide receiver in the draft class. I ultimately made it DK Metcalf just because we've got an extense about why. But N'Keal Harry was my second wide receiver. Great fit for the Patriots. I think he's going to be wide receiver 1, which is a little bit weird when you talk about why we talk about wide receiver 1 for almost any other team. It means their best wide receiver. For the Patriots, wide receiver 1 is legitimately like their outside guy, because ultimately whoever runs the slot from New England, usually Julian Edelman, it was Gronk for a time being, was the #1 and #2 receivers. But I think for outside, no one really offers what N'Keal Harry will be able to bring to that Patriots offense. So I thought that was a great pick. Chase Vinovich was a great pick. Yodny Kajust was a really good value pick. Looking at the tape, Kajust looked like I think a late first round talent. And then it came out that he had like a quad injury and stuff like that, and his stock only really took a hit during like the offseason workouts and stuff while he was playing through an injury. So I thought he was going to be a player that had a lot of value that could be had. And of course the Patriots got him. So just get ready for, in 4 years' time, Yodny Kajust, he cost them a 3rd round. That's when they selected him. In 3 years, 4 years, whatever, and Skarnecki has to work his magic. He's probably going to go to free agency and get them another 3rd round comp pick back in return. And they also got Yalte Frohold from Arkansas. I thought that's a nice offensive lineman pickup. Overall, I'm going to the Patriots like a strong B+, almost into the A-. It's a strong B+, more so between that and an A-. So it's a really good draft. And then finishing up with the Buffalo Bills. Best draft without a doubt, in my opinion, in this year's draft class. And I'm so glad because, a couple months ago, we're trying to make bold predictions, and I made the Bills my dark horse. My last 2 dark horses the last 2 years have gone on to make the playoffs. 2 years ago it was the Jacksonville Jaguars. Last year was the Chicago Bears. This year's the Buffalo Bills. Things started out kind of rocky. Terrible offseason. The AB blue ball thing didn't happen. I'm not a lie. Their free agency moves for the most part have been uninspiring. But this draft was sensational. Literally, this draft is if I was their GM. Ed Oliver, the best player in the draft at pick 9. Cody Ford in the 2nd round. Devin Singletary. Dawson Knox. Voshawn Joseph. Jaquan Johnson. These are all players that I have very high grades on, and I think literally all those guys at some point within their rookie contracts will be starting for the Buffalo Bills. I'm giving them an A+. This was as good of a draft as I've seen. A lot of high upside picks. A guy like Devin Singletary looking forward towards 2020. Could actually be the lead face in that backfield. Dawson Knox, a bit of an unknown, limited production at Ole Miss, but he has incredible upside, and he's a sensational athlete. And I think he has the potential, now with Gronk out of the division, to maybe develop into the best tight end in the AFC East. Give me 3 years. We'll check back on that take in 3 years. But an A+ for the Buffalo Bills. Outstanding draft class. So then moving into the AFC North, we'll start with the Cincinnati Bengals. They actually had a really nice draft. No exceptional picks, but they did get a lot of players that I thought were pretty good. Jonah Williams, Jermaine Pratt, Renell Wren, Travion Williams, Rodney Anderson doubling up on 2 running backs. I'm giving them a B+. It was a very safe draft class. I thought maybe they could have went more on the offensive line. Not a lot left for the linebackers, but when you're kind of starting to dig through guys that, I'm not going to say the scraps, but coming away with a Jermaine Pratt, I really did like that pick. He's a really underrated player, good sideline-to-sideline converted safety, your modern-day defensive linebacker. So a really nice draft pick. Like I said, they just don't have that high-end wow pick, which is why this doesn't get into the A's, but a really nice draft from the Bengals. And I actually usually tend to like the Bengals drafts. The last couple of years, the Bengals and the Vikings have been the 2 teams that I thought have drafted exceptionally well, at least in terms of like my rankings and players that I might regard higher than the consensus draft community. Moving to the Baltimore Ravens, they got Hollywood Brown. I like that. I like Justice Hill. I think he's going to be an interesting piece to that running back core because obviously Mark Ingram is not necessarily a long-term option. Ben Powers on the offensive line was also a pretty good pickup. And really, there was no real questionable picks for the Baltimore Ravens. So they're getting a B+ as well. It was a nice, high upside, safe draft. And, you're trying to replace one of the best GMs the last 2 years. Actually, it was last year, Ozzy's last draft. So if another last year's draft, which was actually kind of weird, but and then you look at this year's draft, and this is the first of the new era, I think they did a pretty good job. I'll give them the B+. Look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. They traded up to get Devin Bush. They got Benny Snell, Sutton Smith, Justin Lane, Isaiah Buggs, a little bit in the later rounds. There's some good value there. There's some good value. I think the Devin Bush pick sounds great on paper because he's exactly what they need. But when you look at the compensation, was a little too rich for my blood for them to trade up from pick 20 all the way to pick 10, swapping with the Denver Broncos. And they get Deontay Johnson from Toledo, 3rd round. you know, Hakeem Butler, like, he's not necessarily a bad player. I think I had him as like a 6th, 7th round prospect. He was draftable. But, I mean, with the wide receivers that were still on the board, like Hakeem Butler, that's a head-scratching pick there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It seems like every year Pittsburgh has a head-scratching pick. Like last year, they just, out of nowhere, like, got Terrell Edmonds. And Terrell Edmonds was like a consensus 3rd-round pick. So, ultimately, the Pittsburgh Steelers wasn't bad. Wasn't a bad draft. I'll give it a B-. And then finishing up in the division, we had the Cleveland Browns. Noteworthy picks, getting Greedy Williams at an absolute steal in the 2nd round. Mac Wilson in day 3. Other than that, it was, the draft was average, but because of those 2 highlights, I'm going to give them a very solid B grade for the Cleveland Browns. And I think Browns, it was a popular thing to say after they get the Odell trade that they're going to be the favorites in the division. But I think after this draft, I can come along and say, yeah, I think it's going to be the Browns division to lose this year. Moving on to the AFC South, we're going to start with the Tennessee Titans, the host. Picks that I did enjoy. I thought Jeffrey Simmons was a good forward-thinking pick. Plus, if they could make a playoff run, which they should be in contention, he probably could return like December at some point, which will be a big push for that defensive front. They got A.J. Brown in the 2nd round. I was kind of hoping he might fall to my Philadelphia Eagles. That is a really nice pickup for a slot wide receiver that has some potential to flex outside. Good tandem, good pairing with Corey Davis. They got Hooker from Iowa, the safety. He's a nice pick. Walker from Georgia in the 5th round. Pretty good pick. Good scheme fit there. So ultimately, I'm going to Tennessee Titans a B+. A really nice draft for them. Moving on to the Indianapolis Colts, they got Rock Ya-Sin after trading out of the 1st round. They got Ya-Sin, the corner from Temple, in the 2nd. Van Banagoo from TCU, very athletic. They got Paris Campbell, a player that I've called the most overrated player in the draft because of the 1st round hype, but they got him at the end of the 2nd round. I can agree with that value because Paris Campbell definitely needs a lot of work, but he still is going to be a nice little gadget player for the offense. Bobby Okereke from Stanford and Marvell Tell from USC, a couple late round Pac-12 players. I thought it was a really good draft yet again. Maybe not necessarily as good of a draft as they had last year, but on paper, B+. A really, really solid draft for the Colts. And, right now, Ballard's emerging as definitely a top 5 GM with these last 2 drafts, last 2 off seasons. And this draft for me, because I've been kind of critical about the Colts, kind of balances out what I thought was actually a kind of whack free agency period by like paying a lot of money for Devin Funchess for whatever reason, and then sitting on all their salary cap and not bringing in some guys that I think could be big time game changers to help the Colts get over the hump and actually go deep into the playoffs. But really nice draft there for Indy. Going to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 2 picks. Yeah, they got Josh Allen. Wasn't necessarily a scheme fit, but it's a really good player. I think that they'll find a way to get really creative with him. And then the 2nd round, they got Jawan Taylor, a player many people thought they'd get it in the 1st. It's almost deja vu because I remember a couple years ago when Cam Robinson out of Alabama was like one of the top offensive linemen. A lot of people mocked him to the Jags in the 1st. They were actually able to wait and just straight up get him in the 2nd. So it's very similar here. But, the question has to be, why is Jawan Taylor slipping? There's some reports about a knee issue. I don't know if it's a lingering one or kind of like Jay Ajayi, where it might be something that always affects him. I haven't actually seen that report yet, but I think those 2 big picks, the top end picks, were nice. Then a big time head scratcher. They got Quincy Williams, who's Quinn Williams' brother, in the 3rd round from, I think it was Murray State. They didn't even have footage of him. Why? I mean, the linebacking class is weak, so you come to nowhere at this guy. I mean, unless they know something we don't, that was kind of a ridiculous pick, and ultimately, I'm going to have to give the Jags a C+. I think the top end talent was good, but for the rest of the draft, it was just kind of bang on average with a couple head-scratching picks. So a C+ there for them, which is, so far in this video, the lowest in the AFC. But, just hold my beer. We're finishing up the division with the Houston Texans. In their picks that I did enjoy, Max Sharping in the 2nd round. I kind of made a tweet about it. Like, you had Brian Burns and Max Crosby. Both those guys defensive end. Brian Burns at Florida State. Max Crosby at Eastern Michigan. They did like Q&As on Reddit and stuff, and they both said, without a doubt, the toughest player they went up against was Max Sharping. I know he wasn't getting a lot of credit for the draft community, but Pro Football Focus loved him. He's like consistently one of the top grades there. And when you have the respect like that amongst your peers, I thought he was a great value pick. Probably should go in the 2nd round. So while some people are saying that's a reach, I think it's a really good pick. Plus, he brings some versatility. He can play guard or tackle. And they also got Charles Amenahu, the defensive end, defensive lineman in general, from the University of Texas late. I think that's a nice developmental prospect. Outstanding frame to build upon, and hopefully you can coach up his technique. But then I got a couple just questionable picks, and here's why. They got Titus Howard, offensive tackle from Alabama State, and then they got Lonnie Johnson Jr. from Kentucky. I think both those players are high upside players, but they need development. And the current track record for the Houston Texans is that they struggle to develop corners and offensive linemen. I mean, they got a bunch of projects at offensive linemen like Julian Davenport and a bunch of these guys that had high ceilings, and they haven't really amounted to much. And you look in the secondary, they already had to like burn Kevin Johnson, the former first-round corner, I think out of Wake Forest, because they just weren't able to develop them. So they don't have the greatest track record of developing these raw prospects, yet they take 2 with their first 2 picks. So that is kind of confusing to me, but if they can turn it all around, I mean, Titus Howard, I actually mocked that. That was a correct, like I took a Hail Mary saying that the Texans would draft Titus Howard, and they actually got him. So hopefully they can develop him, because I do enjoy watching the Texans play, but ultimately I think the Texans a C grade. Wasn't a great draft. I thought they could have did a little bit better with their picks. And then finishing up in the AFC West, we're going to start with the Denver Broncos. Picks that I did like. Noah Fant. Ultimately, I thought it was a little bit weird that they decided to use their first pick on a tight end. I thought their tight end situation was optimistic, but he still is a different dimension to that offense that they needed. Dalton Risner, Drew Lock sitting there, and getting Drew Lock in the second round was awesome value for them. They got Justin Hollins, outside linebacker from Oregon. That was a pretty good pick. Draymond Jones from Ohio State slipped a little bit. They got good value. And the fact that so many people thought they were going to trade up and probably lose a lot of their draft assets, they just sat and wait. They were patient, and they get rewarded for it. I'm giving them an A-. Really good draft there for the Denver Broncos. Looking at the LA Chargers, picks that I did enjoy. They got Jerry Tillery in the first round. Very, very intriguing how they're going to use him on the defense, but I'm pretty sure Gus Bradley would have a nice idea. Getting Nasir Adderley, continuing to add to one of the most stacked defensive backs, defensive secondaries in the league. That's a great fit for them. Only pick I thought was kind of weird, but they got Trey Pipkins in the third round from Sioux Falls. Thought there was better tackles available. I like that they went tackle, because that's who I mocked. I mocked them getting Greg Little my mock draft. But, a third round pick, I thought that was a pretty big reach, but ultimately give the Chargers a nice, safe B grade. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs, players that I liked. I think they did really good work with their first couple picks. McCole Hardman, because it looks like things should, and, rightfully, I hope they do. And for Tyreek Hill, a guy like Hartman is not Tyreek fast, but pretty damn close, and will be able to replicate that in the offense. Getting Juan Thornhill from Virginia, the safety, and then Kalen Saunders, D-tackle from Western Illinois. I thought all those 3 picks are guys that should project to be starters sooner than later on that defense. So I'm going to the Kansas City Chiefs, a very legitimate B grade as well. And then finishing up in the AFC with the Oakland Raiders, lots of positives, man. It's just, could they have done better? Could they have got more value? Like, I like Clelin Ferrell, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Abram, their 3 first-round picks. They got Max Crosby, Fabian Moreau, Hunter Renfrell. They got Quentin Bell, a player I talked about just a little bit from Prairie View. Had an absolutely insane pro day. Doesn't even make sense. He was like a defensive end that ran like a 4.3, something crazy like that. I think they got Isaiah Johnson, too, the cornerback. Nice, great athlete. They got fast, getting a little trickle that Al Davis gets speed first. I think they did a good job. Maybe they could have got better value in the first round, sure. But I think with all those players, with all those picks, those are all guys that I would not be surprised to see in 2 years, 3 years now, all be starting on the Oakland Raiders. So for that, because I think they could have done a little bit better, I'm not going to give them into the A's, but I'm going to give them a very high B+ and a great opening draft for Mike Mayock as the general manager of the Oakland Raiders. So there you go, guys. Those are my AFC grades. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comment section below. As always, a little bit later on tonight, we will have the NFC grades, and we have a couple more days worth of some draft follow content coming as well. So thank you guys for watching, and like I said, first time stopping by, subscribe, smash the like button, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.